Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Dore, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I am taking you to Chile, but not just any part of Chile, but Maule's Secano interior, a wine region that is a living history book. It's less about polished commercial wines and more about soulful, authentic expressions. There's a real movement here to preserve heritage varieties and old vines. And when it comes to old vines, who better than to talk to the winner of the Old Vine Hero Special Award 2024 for overall impact, Derek Mossman Knapp of Garage Wine Co. He was shortlisted in the Old Vine Hero Award categories for viticulture and winemaking. However, he received so many votes, the board decided to present him the prestigious award for overall impact. He's also the founding member of VIGNO, short for Vignadores de Carignan. It's a collective of Chilean producers dedicated to crafting age-worthy wines from old vine, dry-farmed Carignan in the Maule Valley. Has really strict rules that emphasize tradition, terroir, and, of course, quality. And he's also the founding member of MOVI, Movimiento de Viñateros Independientes. This is an organization that champions independent Chilean vintners and promotes artisanal wine production. So Derek is a super interesting guy. Our conversation on this episode focuses on the grape variety País, the very first grape to come to Chile in the mid-1500s. And we'll also be talking about why Maule is so special. So pour yourself a glass of wine and enjoy. Everybody listening to you is going to realize rather quickly that you aren't Chilean. So how the hell did you even get to Chile?
I came to Chile to ski in a year that it didn't snow in New Zealand. We came down here to Portillo, and I thought that was absolutely terrific. And there were people there were two from here, two from there, from various countries in Europe and the US and Canada. And I decided that was a great summer job. So while I went to University of Toronto first, I came down here 3 times. I think I came 4 times in all. And it was a wonderful way to meet a continent, meet a country. I suppose it was winter, but it was altitude-induced winter. And it was a wonderful look at the cross-section of South American society. And obviously, Chile was in a very interesting place during those years. It began with Pinochet and grew into something very, very different. It opened its arms to trade with the entire world. And my father once said it was very much like the 60s in Canada. And I think he's right.
And in terms of you setting up a winery, then how did that come about?
It was a hobby. Garage was a hobby in the garage between 2001 in 2006 or 7. I married a winemaker.
Lovely Pilar.
She worked in various cellars. Pilar Miranda. And when we had our first child, she was offered a wonderful job in a perfume and flavorings company. And it was part-time, and the garage kind of took off at that point because it was kind of curriculum for her, right? If we can make a couple of Cracker Jack wines, then she could step back into a proper job making wine instead of something adjunct selling barrels or what have you. And with that in mind, it became kind of an expensive, not habit, but hobby to have, until the first to take the wines abroad was a Dane who had wine bars. Ken Oosted has wine bars in Copenhagen. And he arrived, we never knew how he found the house or anything, but he investigated the whole thing up, had phoned people, and he knocked on the door one day and said, I know what you're doing. I've tasted the wines. I want to take them to Denmark. So we had a whole process of making it into a legal entity that could export. And this is about the time when MOVI begins. So Sven from Procura, Felipe Garcia, there were kind of 3 or 4 that were doing talking about smaller group getting together. And we helped form the Movement of Independent Vintners, or El Movimiento de Viñateros Independientes. I say it in Spanish because I think it sounds more Monty Python in Spanish than it does in English. It was a great group of people who, felt that small had a role, and that we had to kind of atomize or diversify what Chile was doing. And we had, with one of our tanks, taking it closer to the crusher. See, we run an operation here that is kind of like the skunk works of a larger winery. We have our tanks down the back. And here and there, we do have to do a few funny things with, we say yales, we say yale, like forklifts, we would say.
Oh, yeah, forklifts. Yeah, I understand that, yes.
We work independently with small tanks that resemble lagars, kind of the old wooden staple for making wine here, except we've made them out of stainless steel.
And you were telling me, you were showing me before we started recording, everything is tiny tanks, small vessels. You compress everything by feet in the lagares that you have, right?
We make 100,000 bottles in a year, and they're parcels. So there's like a little bit from here, a little bit from there. And the idea was we made wine in the Maipo, and we bought a few thousand kilos from larger growers, producers. But we kind of got lost in that. I think we were a nuisance to them. And especially when the press got a hold of your wine and thought this was terrific and they wanted to taste your wine instead of the owner's wine, obviously they got their noses at the joint. And we decided, well, this would be much easier if we could find smaller producers. So smaller growers. So we came to Maule, and I don't think we really had it clear in our head that smaller meant elderly gentlemen with 3 hectares. One of them was planted to vines and who also grew wheat and had animal husbandry and whatever else. A vegetable garden. It was kind of 360-degree farming. So we met folks with País, with Carignan. We eventually began to graft Garnacha, Monastrell, and other things. We found Syrah. And in the end, we grew a company around these parcels, like a mosaic, like a patchwork quilt. And I suppose commercially you would say, no, but you should build a pyramid where it's clear what's entry level and what is reserve and all that. But those categories don't really exist in Chile. So I thought it was kind of fun, the challenge of doing these parcels that celebrate these little towns in a valley where they come from. And it worked. It's been a real challenge, but we came along at a time when that's what the world wants to drink.
And so is that the philosophy?
It's not small for being small.
Uh-huh.
It's small because with focus, you can do things differently.
Talk to me about Maule, because for many people who think of vineyards or even the Chilean wine industry in Maipo, it's so different when we start coming down south in Chile. We're talking people going through the vineyards on horses. We're talking bush vines. We're talking pre-phylloxera vines. So talk to me about the magic of Maule and being there.
Technically, the magic begins because we're on the coastal range. Sorry to begin by being so technical. But in the end, because you are on the coastal range, you've got decomposed granite, which means you have the base, the foundation to do something fundamentally different than in the Central Valley. You have, the different acidity in soils and in plants. And this was the cradle of Chilean viticulture. This is where plants were planted on kind of, the frontier as they moved south. I grew up in Canada. We call it homesteading in Canada, the US, where you were granted land, you built a home, farmed the property, and were given title 5 years later. Similar thing happened here. But in part of gaining that title was to make wine for the Catholic Church, to continue saving souls going further south.
Okay.
So that those país, that Listan Prieto on the hillsides of Maule was a part of the history of Chile as it grew further south. The amazing thing is when you put it into historical context, because numbers or dates don't mean anything necessarily. I mean, the oldest document of this process of gaining the title is from 1548. And it's a number, but in 1548, Michelangelo had finished the Sistine Chapel, but was still on contract painting ceilings in the Vatican.
Doesn't that, that's okay. That's better than a number.
Like the Earth was still the center of the universe, because the book that was published that would propose that the sun was the center of, of the galaxy or whatever, isn't for about 5 years after that, Copernicus. I mean, it really is phenomenal to think about that. And of course, it's Renaissance. So, just think of where people's minds are. It's so long ago. I always thought it was funny when they called you New World. You're dealing with. We for years worked with people, Don Nivaldo, Bolivar. They didn't have driver's licenses because they drove horses. They grew wheat and cut it with a scythe that was ground in an old stone mill. The only modernization they had was the wheat thresher ran on a Massey Ferguson instead of a steam engine, but it still had the big belt. The tria was still a big deal. A candidate for mayor is resuscitating, is reviving the machine to bring it back because they miss the old flour, the old kind of harder wheat flour, and they bake flour here, and it's like a malt, and you put it in water sometimes with sugar. They would say toast, sorry, more than bake. It's harina tostado. And they still make it. And people who come back down here who've gone to live in the city, they buy a great deal of it. Everyone buys a great deal of it. There's wonderful ice cream that is harina tostado flavor, like toasted flour flavor. It's kind of malty. It's really good.
But the point is that still now, this is a region that's just not industrialized at all, right? You still feel like...
Nearby is industrialized, but when you go into these valleys of the coastal range, you really do meet a lot of people who still work traditionally and they farm. And I suppose, depending on the optics, you could say some would say they're poor, but to another's way of thinking, they live a very rich life. They eat much better than most of us because they eat from what grows and is brought up around them. It's wonderful to be a part of that. Now, our businesses we're all over the map here. Our businesses had to develop to that, and that's part of what we've become.
So, in terms of what you have become, you recently, 2024, won the Old Vine Heroes Award for outstanding work and overall impact on the Old Vine movement, which is really impressive. So talk to me about what that means to you and how, the Garage Wine Company has built up and you working with these old vines. How does it feel to get that recognition?
Working with the Old Vine Conference has been wonderful. It's been several years now. Like from almost when they began, we saw kind of the conversation and someone wanted to do an interview or include us in a talk once. And I just thought it was wonderful that there was this kind of kindred spirit of people in other parts of the world that were doing something very similar, because there's something in common to me with old vines, and it's beyond just the age or the quality of wine that you can make. Kind of by definition, they're in less celebrated places, and they're varieties that are less mainstream. So it's not necessarily David and Goliath, but there's this kind of factor of how you turn this into a business or maintain these vines. And I could hear in the conversation similar experiences around the world. So we got involved with Pilar. And oftentimes we would speak of the VIGNO project, which is like a collective based around that same thing. We were quite proud when we won it. We tried as best we could to kind of share it with the whole group, with the people, that they realized that this is what we're all doing together. It wasn't just that, you'd won something. It was like the way we're doing this project is turning heads, is making people think maybe we could do that. And I thought that was absolutely terrific. Of course, that led to IWSC funding for a project on VIGNO, which was like a research paper, which Pilar and I were heavily involved with. I didn't think I'd ever, I hate to say my age, but one does theses and papers like that when one is younger, because the work it takes to get 60, 70 page paper written of the financial aspect of it and the scientific aspect of it and what was the group dynamics. The idea was we try to do a project that would help some others in other parts of the world to learn from our experience of how we came together and what worked and what didn't. There's a roadmap for other people trying to form that kind of collective. Because in a way, the collective is a sort of DOC that doesn't really exist in Chile. In Chile, we have the geographical divisions, but this was a group that was kind of privately, voluntarily formed that created this effect of a DOC around Old Vine Carignana in the Maule.
Well, let me ask you for a second. When I was saying to you about what we're going to talk about, and I was like, let's talk about Carignan. And you were like, oh, yes, Carignana. Why have you decided that we should be calling Carignan Carignana?
It's a Spanish variety. Now, in Aragon, or wherever it's originally from, they say that only in the zone of Carignana should you call it Carignana, and you should call it, they got about 6 names for it. The same for Monastrell becomes Mourvedre, etc., etc. We have a Spanish heritage in South America.
That makes sense.
Carignana to me makes a lot more sense than, I understand the Frenchifying of things, of many things cultural. Now, if the English were not the inventors, but if the English were who took business or capitalism or industrialization around the world, the French took culture, and it wasn't just, how do you say, music or painting, whatever. It was also food and wines and many things they helped to influence. But we have a wine culture in Chile from long before the Frenchifying of kind of the late 1800s. There was wine in Chile from colonial times, and there was Carignana. Carignana was a popular, variety to blend with País, with Sonso, and with other things long before Chile was a Cabernet producer as we know it today. And I think we should look back at history and learn the importance of that, and that we have these wonderful vines that are 100 years old. It makes that easier to get across to people.
Well, listen, you know what? We are going to talk about the Vignadores de Carignan, although obviously we should be changing that to de Carignana in a moment. We're going to talk about that. So keep everyone on their toes as to what that is, because we do have a Carignana wine to drink. But I want to talk about this old vine revival País that I have in front of me. So obviously País is the original grape variety that came to, I'm going to use a number, came to Chile in the 1500s. But I love this grape variety. I get so excited about this grape variety because it has this lightness and brightness. And yes, if it's not handled properly, it can be a little bit rustic. But I think then it has this lovely kind of herbal, floral character. So talk to me about, old vine País. I mean, why is old vines important? And what do you think about this grape variety?
This is what came from the original grapes of the Americas. This is Mission in California. This is, there's many names through different countries. But this was from colonial times. And this was what was country wine, was pipeño, was País, sometimes with other things like Carignana in it. But this had a wonderful history. And it was always the country wine in Chile, and I think it's done really well in certain places since natural wine has taken it on to try and take pipeño. If you travel to Brooklyn, for example, today, and if you go to a restaurant, Brooklyn's become very, very hip, obviously. That's where the hipsters, I think, come from now. But if you go to a restaurant in Brooklyn, there will be País on the menu. And if there isn't, and you ask, they will apologize that they will give you an explanation for why there isn't a place, because they realize it is incorrect. I remember going to New York City with the MOVI movement, tasting with the critics in 2010, 2011 or something when we first began, and asking what they had from Chile on the list and being told nothing. What kind of an establishment do you think this is? I mean, New York has come a long way. But to me, País was something that perhaps Chile should have had earlier, because it's a very Chilean variety, right? It was something unique from Chile, instead of being like somewhere else but less expensive, or it could have been something true and real. I think this is wonderful. Maybe that's not necessarily just a summer wine, but it is lighter and fresher. And sorry, I'm going to enjoy some here.
You're totally allowed to enjoy some. I love the fact that this is such a crunchy wine, and it is, of course, a wine that you can have a little bit more chilled. But I love that it's got this lovely red currants, like slightly tart, sour red fruits. But there's like this hibiscus nature. It's a little bit woodsy. It's a little bit earthy. It's difficult to place, but it's like, is it a bit stony? Is it a bit smoky? Is it a little bit earthy? Is it a little bit floral? It's all of it. And it's tart at the same time. I find it has this lovely silky mouthfeel, but then chalkiness at the same time. Not at all rustic. And there's almost like on the palate, lovely strawberries and balsamic. So for something that is very light and very fresh, there's always so much interest inside a well-made bottle of País. I've always found País very, very fascinating. What percentage is this? The one that we're drinking?
About 12 and a half.
Oh, is it 12 and a half? For everybody listening, so this is actually specifically the one that we're drinking. Because I am in the UK, you have an importer, a wonderful importer called Jascots. So this is actually a specific wine that you've made with them or for them and only available in the UK. Am I right?
Well, not just the UK. This is available through Jascots, and this is available on Slurp, is the kind of means for people to kind of get it at home. Internet site, very popular. This was something we did with the parent company, with Fretnik Kopstik, that was to, this is the height of COVID. Remember, we had made a special wine after the earthquake, and we had made wines after the fires in 2017. So we were collecting the elements. Yeah, we had earth fire. Now we had, this was air. So what we did was we had like a bootstrapping program where people could bring back the vines in their backyard behind their homes, instead of having to get in a van to go pruning closer to a larger city and a larger farm and potentially getting ill because they were sharing a vehicle with people from another town. This was a means of keeping people in that smaller family bubble or whatever I think we talked about back then. And this is something the English reached out. We did this in Sweden as well. And it is now in a group of wine boroughs called Barcelona in the United States and doing rather well, very popular. And with our importer in Ontario in Canada. It's just a wonderful celebration of a lighter wine, lighter in alcohol, lighter bottle, lighter everything, kind of that goes with the times and with younger people.
Beautiful, because it's lovely, something you can just sip on its own. You can have it with a barbecue. What's amazing, I can't talk about all the other locations that you've just mentioned, but in the UK, this is available with Slurp normally $17.95, but available right now for $12.95, which is absolutely ridiculous. Literally, everybody, if you're listening to this now before they change the price back, they've obviously put a £5 discount. I mean, buy a case, just get it, because $12.95 for this softness, this length, this freshness. And we are obviously in the Northern Hemisphere going into spring and summer, which this is unbelievably perfect and ridiculous value right now. And to think that this is a beautiful project. I can see you've only made 5,000 bottles.
There should be a QR code on the bottle, and that should lead you to...
Yes, there is.
Pictures, documentation of the people working through the year, picking the fruit. We try to be very kind of transparent about what is kind of behind the bottle.
That's beautiful. I'm going to check that out later. Now, let me ask you, on the bottle, and this is not just this bottle, this will be on many of your other wines, and people will see that you've labeled this Secano Interior Cauquenes. Now, obviously, Cauquenes is a specific area, but why are you putting Secano Interior rather than Maule Valley?
Secano Interior is the old DO system before the SAG came through with Maipo, Colchawa, Maule, and the rest. Strictly speaking, one cannot legally export País from Maule. It has to be Secano Interior because it's considered this kind of historical variety. So Secano Interior means the dry farmed interior. So it's like the rain shadow of the coastal range. And then the apellido, we say, the surname that goes with the category is Cauquenes, Coelemu, goes up and down the coastal range.
Okay.
I quite love the old designation. I wish we could make everything we make. I wish we could make all of our Carignanes as Secano Interior. I think it'd be brilliant. I suppose I'm a bit of an upstart. It would upset things, but I think it's brilliant.
I had no idea that you couldn't legally export, because I've seen bottles of País say Maule on them. So it's like
you could say it, but you couldn't say D.O. Maule. They've done it in a way that, you know, they made it part of a trade name, but legally it should have Secano Interior, and legally it should have what specific part of the Secano Interior it comes from. Probably says that on the back where it legally complies. You know.
Okay, so Cauquenes, now this is the one place that I always hear about when we talk about País from the Secano interior. Is this known as the best place for País or just the most concentrated place for old vine País?
I think there's a lot of old vine País in Cauquenes, and it takes up quite an area. I think in the last few years, País hasn't moved the vineyards to where they always were. But winemakers have found things closer and closer to the coast. And some of those bottlings are really quite wonderful because you get things that are fresher, you get different kind of herbs and wild flowers, kind of that dry flowers present in them. I think there's wonderful things to be done. There's a tremendous potential to graft onto roots of País as well. There's, to me, some of the best Cabernet in Chile today is Cabernet Sauvignon grafted onto roots of País in and around south of Cauquenes going towards the coast, Coronel de Maule. There's some wonderful wines coming out of there today.
Interesting. So people are doing Cabernet Sauvignon onto old vine País rootstocks. Is that more of the trend right now, or are people bringing other grape varieties?
I'm not sure it's a trend. There are a lot of varieties. People are doing Garnacha, Syrah, Monastrell, Whites, Chenin Blanc, Longueville is doing. There's some wonderful results from it. Of course, I would never call it a trend, nothing against trends, but none of this is scalable because the way País has been planted, it can't be mechanized.
Yeah, can you talk about that? Because we are talking bush vines, low to the ground, old, for people who've never seen a picture of a Maule vineyard. Can you discuss how these vines are taken care of?
This is old bushhead, but we say that the old vines, they commit three sins. They are too far from a paved road. The vineyard is not big enough to fill a proper modern truck, and that the way they're planted, they can't be mechanized. Which means unless you're going to make something, I'm not sure where we begin with the line for fine wine, but unless you make something with focus and how do you say volition, intention, and someone pays a proper price for it, it's very difficult to manage that vineyard. This is why I think there's a lot of smaller, more focused projects doing well with these vineyards or with old vines, because it's really difficult for a large company to have a cost center and to have a farm of less than, I'm not sure what calculation would be today, but much less than about 60 hectares. Doesn't make financial sense to plant a vineyard today, whereas none of these are any more than a hectare and a half. Some are a little bit bigger because they've been subdivided amongst a family or something. But there's some wonderful examples of wine to make that on a hectare you probably have 4,000, maybe 4,500 plants. If you had 1.5 kilos, maybe 2 kilos from each, you're nowhere near proper production that the industry, as we like to say in Chile, is accustomed to. And that all has to be done by hand. And you could argue you could do it regeneratively and not plow soils with horses like was once done, but that's still in the test phase.
Is that something that people are actually stepping back from, this plowing with horses?
No, I don't think so. I think plowing is still the best way to do in this particular part. I think it's still the best way to do it. I think we have to redefine plowing. When we say no-till, I think we mean to say no 1,000 horsepower tractor with 50 discs behind it. I would completely agree that we shouldn't be tilling that way any product. But when it's a complicated issue, and it's still very much being studied in the south of Spain. We're working with people in a similar way that because of the conditions, what little rain we have, there is no chance to grow anything green. I suppose you could be regen if you irrigated, but that's not the idea. You're touching on a very very complex. We're in trials. Let's save that for the next wine we have, and maybe we can go into some detail of the trials of what is regen and how much life is in soil.
Yes, okay, so we'll save it for that. But in terms of people listening, actually, it is a really valid point, isn't it? That Maule is this really interesting region where you get those warm days, but very cool nights. You do get 700 to 800 millimeters of rain, but actually a lot of it, because of the granitic soils. Okay.
Much less than that in some years. And I think the trouble is that when there was more, things weren't planted in a way that would make the best use of that water. Like in Rioja, there's many vineyards that were planted kind of due to where the sun comes up and goes down, so that you've got lines going, rows going up and down a hill, and the rain just runs off. We were standing next to a vineyard a few years ago, speaking with people, and someone was talking, I think it was 650 millimeters of rain. And what this person started to say amongst a mixed group of people was that, well, let's just imagine we're here and we've got like a child's above ground pool, and the wall of the pool is 65 centimeters, 650 millimeters. And that is the amount of rain that is falling. And you could see everyone as they got their mind around that depth of water is what falls in a year. And a few people kind of said, but that's not right. And some other people said, well, what did you think 650 millimeters is? But we never get that. That's precisely what you do get. The trouble is that it all runs off. And of course, with this person, he had a proper talk planned. And as we walked around the farm, you realize that they were fixing the road every year because the runoff was ruining the road, and they had to run a tractor through to rebuild the road properly. Is it you don't have enough water, or is it you're not doing anything with the water that you do have? And that's when you come to a point where, can you have keyline farming that retains the water better? And there's other kind of modern modes that are a part of regenerative agriculture. But there's a lot of things that need to be thought about and rethought.
Interesting. What do you think then with all these old vines in Maule, but with the fact that it's old men with only a hectare of land and everything has to be done by hand, and you're finding all these little plots and working with them and figuring out ways to bring it all together. But it's difficult as well with the rain, and global warming is not making things any easier. But
we've made changes. We have a lot of. We're happy to say. I'm happy to say we have a lot of elders working with us still. They would insist, and they have the energy and the pride, and they do the work. But what we've come to do generally is it's not fair to depend upon them to do the work the way you want to do it. So you come to an agreement normally with the sons and daughters who've moved to town, to the city, and you rent the farm so that the couple, they have a proper means of living, of retiring, with dignity on their land. And then what we've done is you've worked with, we've built like the A team of people to prune, to plow, to do all the preparations as well as just harvest, but throughout the whole year. And then you go from farm to farm in a logical order of what soils need, what at what time. And in the end, that's why this has worked for us. We've really had to build a business around the situation, the circumstances that we found. People look at it today, sometimes I think, and they see it as being altruistic. But to be honest, this is years and years ago that we were just being practical. It was just how do we get to the next harvest? When we were speaking about the tanks earlier, about the bottles, when we silk screened, there's many things we did over the years that helped us prepare for this idea that you could do this, but this needs a different kind of business built around it. We realized that because you were picking so few kilos, for example, that you didn't really have enough picking days, that any group of pickers took you very seriously, because they had other clients that were much bigger, and you were going on about, don't pick the second bud, and don't pick if there's any raisins on it. And you were being the most difficult. But in the end, the people deep down realized that we were doing something at a higher level, whatever, a higher quality level, like they used to do it. So what we did was we literally bought a van, formed our own team, created captains, found the best at at pruning, so that they could teach younger people. And we built around the business around the way to work with these farms, to the point where now others would say that you can see or feel the difference in the local economy of a couple of these little valleys. And of course, once you started doing that, other people want to work with you. People come to us and say, okay, so I've got a few things to pick here. I'll work around you. When do you think you'll have people available? And you send the A team to pick my fruit. And they'll pay more than they're used to paying, but they realize they don't need a selection table, because these people they're accustomed to picking the right we want to pick. Mm. Right. And in the end, because you have your own team, you can literally afford to pick something in the morning, but something else in the afternoon, because you want to pick this twice. You don't have to be how do you say, I don't want to criticize efficiency, but what does efficiency taste like? What does that smell, or what flavor does that have? It doesn't strike me as something I'd want to go out and taste with friends. Many times we need efficiency to get things done, but if you really look for flavor, you need to have a group that has the flexibility that we'll be doing this in the morning, and then we'll move over here and we'll do that, and they all realize why. When we have the lamb on the barbecue mid-harvest or at the end of harvest, these wines all go out and they taste them and they opine. And they think that the Cabernet Franc is a wonderful wine. I'm just draining it this morning, but it's not worth all the hassle that we go through to make it, which I think is humorous. They say that the País and the Carignan comes off the vine more easily. The truck gets closer to the vines. I just think it's fun that they're included in that. I'm not sure that they necessarily have the taste of the world, but when you make a wine, for example, with stems, and it has kind of the, how do we say, like the tannins of the plant, of the fruit, of the place, they do enjoy those wines more than wines with barrels.
All this that you talk about is just a labor of love. Everything is a labor of love here, right?
Yes, because I'm not sure you can make it well if it isn't.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
I think that's true of a restaurant chef or anything else. I think it would be very, very similar.
So with you, all this hard work, and with the fact that now it's come around where many other people with small, tiny plots actually are coming to you as well and working around your schedule, is the future bright for Maule and production on the global stage?
I'm not sure it's bright. The whole wine trade is in a very tough position in these years. That's not what we've come together to talk about. But these are very challenging times. But I think I can honestly and easily say people who are working in that light, who have differentiated products, even if it was more difficult in the beginning because who'd heard of Maule or who wanted to drink Carignan or whatever, I think those who've differentiated themselves from others are faring far better now than those who simply made what was trendy, but with a little more residual sugar or with a different kind of packaging. I think there are people who have found kind of that wine they like, and they'll come back to it. And yes, they'll pay a little more for it. It's all relative. None of these wines are tremendously expensive, but they all cost what it takes to make a proper bottle of wine without being, how do you say, truly capable of taking advantage of economies of scale, because you just can't on any scale.
Next week, we carry on our chat, but focusing more on the grape Carignan, or Carignan, as Derek prefers to call it, and VIGNO, the Association of Producers Making Quality Carignan in Maule Valley. But before you go, a wine quote as always, and this one is from Pedro Parra, a Chilean terroir expert, often referred to as Dr. Terroir. And he said, "País isn't a comeback grape. It never left. It just waited for us to come back to it." I think that what I find so special about País is it is this reminder that true beauty lies in honouring the past whilst letting it speak in the present. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate, review and share the podcast with your wine-loving friends. It really helps the podcast grow and reach more wine lovers just like you. Wishing you a beautiful week ahead, and remember, sometimes the best things come with a little bit of patience, just like a good bottle of wine. Until next Monday, wine friends, cheers to you.